All right, so let's keep reading down through this. So verse 4. How are we doing on time? Wow, it's fantastic. Verse 4, and Jesus answered and said to them, see to it that no one misleads you. All right, I also find it interesting that instead of Yeshua just turning around and answering them saying, what? You guys are asking me about the end times? This is an eschatological question, right, guys? And the disciples are like, yeah. And Yeshua says, tell you what, don't need to worry about it. Don't worry about it. It'll all pan out. It'll all work out. Everything's handled according to my Father's plan. Heck, even I don't know when I'm coming back, so don't worry about it, all right? Just focus on what you need to do today, right? Keep going about your daily lives, serving me, believing in me, trusting in my Father. But everything will work out, right? You guys cool with that? No, that's not what Jesus says. He actually takes this opportunity to go into great detail about the events leading up to the end of the age and the events leading up to his return. And he starts by telling them, see to it that no one misleads you, indicating that rough times are ahead, fellas, right? You guys need to buckle in because it's about to get rough. But also the point I'm trying to make, I'm not trying to be kind of sacrilegious in my irony and in my humor here, just trying to get us to understand that he didn't just say, hey, don't worry about it. It's not pan-rapturism. It's not like everything's just going to pan out if you don't worry about it. It's not like, hey, I could come at any moment, so you guys don't even really need to know the details, right? As an imminency. It's really, hey, I'm going to return, but here's what's going to precede my returning. He actually gives them signposts so that we can have a sense of the urgency of the matter as to when the time is going to come, right? When will these events befall us? So I think that we should go with what the context of what our master gave us, in that, yes, we can't know the exact day or hour when Yeshua returns, but we can in fact know the season, and we should know the season because we're not children of darkness, like Paul talks about. We are children of the light. So let's keep reading our Lord's words. So here's what I have to say. Acknowledging the potential for misinformation and deception, Jesus underscores the importance of discernment, right, by us believers. This advice remains relevant in any age, reminding believers to critically evaluate teachings and claims, right? The end of the age is going to be earmarked by not just earthquakes in diverse places and wars and rumors of wars and famine and plague and pestilence and all that other stuff, but it's also going to be earmarked by false Christs, right? The very first seal that's opened by John, that John sees Yeshua open in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, is the seal that indicates a white rider who's given a bow and he's sent out to conquer and to go conquering. And this first rider is what we call the emergence of the Antichrist, the rise of Antichrist, right? I just love saying that. The rise of Antichrist reminds me of that the Terminator moves, The Rise of the Machines, right? The rise of Antichrist during the first half of what I believe is the 70th week of Daniel. All right, so false Christs, and then Yeshua continues to elaborate. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will mislead many. Interestingly enough, he's going to echo this same warning over and over again throughout this discourse. He doesn't just say it once, which means many of these seals, as they begin to unfold, will just continue to gain momentum as the week unfolds itself. So if we put the 70th week on a timeline of 7 years, which I think is good to do, instead of stretching it out over thousands of years like maybe the historicist or the idealist might do, but instead we put it on the 7-year time frame, then what we're seeing is that Yeshua says there will be some events that kick off the end time schedule of 70 years, 7 years, the final 7-year stretch. But those events are going to continue throughout the 7 years, but they'll just keep building in momentum and intensity, kind of snowballing, as it were. So we'll have false Christ start increasing as we get near the end of the age, but then we'll have the consummate false Christ make his entrance. So you see what I'm saying? Yeshua is saying, yeah, you're gonna have false Christs here and there and everywhere. And indeed, even in 70 AD and in 130s, we had the Bar Kokhba revolt, and Bar Kokhba himself is considered a false Christ, an antichrist, someone who claimed to be a Messiah or was labeled as a Messiah by rabbinic Judaism at the time, until it ended up being that he was not the true Christ, right? Obviously, he didn't usher in any sort of kingdom. He was defeated, right? His revolt came to an end by the Roman armies, right? They just plowed Jerusalem under and renamed it Aelia Capitolina. It wasn't even Jerusalem anymore. Well, this means that if the Messiah was supposed to come and establish his 1,000-year kingdom, well, nothing happened in the first century. And that's my kind of challenge to the preterists, even the partial ones. If supposedly 70 AD was the event that Yeshua was talking about and nothing else, if there was no future event to follow after that, then what happened to Yeshua's kingdom? They say, it's here, it's in our hearts, right? Like Jesus said, my kingdom's not of this planet, it's here on earth. Well, that really is a kind of a gross spiritualization of a lot of the Old Testament prophecies that talk about how the characteristics of the age to come is to be identified with the reduction of sin on the earth, the change in the animals and the nature of humans and animals, the lion lying down with the lamb, the little baby putting his hand to the hole of the viper and thing like that. People will live securely, and the Torah will go forth from Jerusalem, right? Isaiah chapter 2. The mountains will drip sweet wine. The Lord will be king over all the earth in that day. The Lord will be one, like in Zechariah. The Lord will be one. His name will be one. All the nations will stream to Jerusalem and pay homage to the king, celebrating the Feast of Tabernacles. And like it says at the end of Zechariah, things like that. Guess what, preterists? None of that happened, right? So what are you going to do with those verses? So, can't spiritualize all that stuff away. Plus, the really big one for me, as I'm kind of poking my finger at the preterists here for a moment, is when John talks in the book of Revelation how that for the 1,000 years when Yeshua's ruling, the devil will be bound. Last time I checked, he hasn't been bound. He's not bound. In fact, he's been wreaking havoc on planet Earth, even in greater measure after Yeshua left. Right? Look at false religions, look at violence in the earth, look at wars. Hello, World War I, World War II, all the other wars, Vietnam War, the civil wars, the wars that are everywhere around the world. Look at the civil unrest, look at the injustice in the world, look at all of the wrongdoings that are done by human beings, look at all the demonism, all the satanic activity, the occult, and all the darkness in everywhere in the world. You're trying to tell me that Satan is bound right now? I don't think so. So I get a little bit heated when I hear preterists say, oh yeah, Satan's bound right now. In what way? Come on. Let's use our thinking brains. All right, let's go back to the text. Sorry for the little soapbox there. All right, so Jesus warns, I say in my own commentary, Jesus warns of false messiahs and their misleading influence. This caution against deception, I say, underscores the complexity of discerning genuine spirituality amidst counterfeit claims. And it's no more made aware than when we start looking around. Just do a Google search for false messiahs in various places of the world, right? We've had our Jim Joneses, we've had our Moon Sung Myuns, we've had all of our people who say that they're the Lord, they're the Messiah, they're the Jesus, they're reincarnated Jesus. It's just so ridiculous. The claims are absolutely ludicrous when you consider that just about everyone who's made such a claim is dead. And their bones are still rotting in a grave somewhere. They have not resurrected like Yeshua proved, or God proved the vindication of his son by resurrecting him from the dead to become the first fruits of those who resurrect and never die again, right? Jesus wasn't the only one to have resurrected. There are numerous people in the Bible who resurrected even before Jesus, right? Remember Lazarus, right? They resurrected before Jesus ever resurrected. And when Yeshua died and was crucified, there were a lot of graves that came up out of the bodies. The lot of bodies that came up out of the graves that was recorded in the book of in the Gospels. And so we know that the resurrection has been taking place. Smith Wigglesworth, a modern day Christian evangelist or preacher, he also raised people from the dead, documented, verified, medically verified resurrections from the dead. And yet, all of the people who've been resurrected have died again. They've been resurrected. They died, they're resurrected, and then they died again, right? So they were resurrected for a short time, and then they went on to die again. But not Yeshua. Resurrected and never to die again. Thus, he is the first one to have a glorified body. First one for all of us that will have that glorified body. So, false Christ. Yeah, Jesus says, don't go. Nope, you'll know. And he's going to go on later on to say that the reason you'll know that they're false, one of the reasons is because, not just of the resurrection, but one of the reasons you'll know that they're false is because the true Christ will come in such glorious fashion that the entire world will be aware of the miraculous and the glorified event. Like the lightning flashes from the east to the west, so will the sign of the coming of the Son of Man be in the sky, right? It's not going to be a secret event. The entire world will realize that, wow, something is happening. It won't be like some secret, hey, guess what? I saw the Christ. He's over there. He's in this upper room. You got to come with me and see him, right? It's the secret, hidden, unknown event. Nope, that's not the way it's going to work. All right, verse 6. Jesus continues, you will be hearing of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not frightened, for those things must take place, but that is not yet the end. So again, remember the disciples asked, when will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? But Yeshua starts in verse 6 to start talking about the end before he talks about his return. He reverses the order that the answers. There are actually two signs, as I understand. There is a sign of his return and a sign of the end of the age. There are two signs that are that we can be looking for. We'll get to those in time, but don't worry about it right now. I go on to say in this part of my commentary, Jesus preempts alarm caused by conflicts by emphasizing that these are just the precursors, not the ultimate fulfillment of the end times. We talked about how that these are the beginnings of birth pains, just like a woman goes into hard labor before she gives birth. So the labor pains are the signs of an impending birth, right, of a birth that's imminent, that's right around the corner. Thus, Yeshua's warnings that he's giving to disciples of what's going to be happening are a sign of his return. So that's why I don't believe that the historicists and the idealist views are really the best way to interpret these passages, by stringing all the events out along history, along the course of 1,000 years or several thousand years since Yeshua's been gone now. It loses the force, it destroys the force of his pregnancy analogy, where he's talking about the birth pangs. And he uses that word birth pangs. We're going to see here later on in the passage. These are the beginnings of birth pangs. Well, women don't go into labor for years and years and years before they give birth to a baby. That's not the way it works. It's a shortened time period, right? Even from the moment of the awareness of being pregnant, right? The woman takes a pregnancy test and she realizes that she's pregnant. Even then, there's still no signs of that there's a baby in the womb, other than that she took the pregnancy test. I mean, the baby's still so small that she can't feel anything there. It's only by ultrasound and looking inside from the outside that she can even tell that there's a baby. Eventually, the baby grows, obviously, and then the signs, she starts showing. She ends up with what we call a baby bump, right? Her stomach starts protruding. And then those are obviously signs that a baby's coming. But even still, there's months down the road. And then what happens? Eventually, the belly gets bigger, and then the water breaks, and the birth pains or the labor pains and all those things. I'm not sure I got the order correctly, but you guys know what I'm talking about. We have some really, really definitive signs that the birth is just imminent, right? I mean, when the water breaks and the labor pains really kick in, that's when it's time to get to the hospital, because that baby could pop out at any moment. You don't know. That's when it's really imminent. But before then, it's just expectancy, not imminency. And I think that's what Yeshua is trying to get at here. There's expectancy up to a point, but all of that is even within the context of as you get closer and closer, you know that the baby's right around the corner, and then there's really imminency after that. All right, so nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. In various places there will be famines and earthquakes. I'm reminded that as of this teaching, there was this really massive earthquake in Morocco this past week, and thousands of people are feared to have been killed and much more injured. And the authorities are just saying, wow, this is a kind of sometimes when these things happen, they call it like a once in a generation quake, where it's just bigger than we've ever seen on the records, or largest in 1,000 years or something. That's what I mean by once in a generation. So this just reminds me that planet Earth is starting to get close to the time that we're reading about right here in Yeshua's words. And so I say in my commentary that this verse further elaborates on the preceding verse, right, illustrating a world plunged into turmoil because of sin. It's man's fault. Because of what he did in the garden, our first parents did in the garden, they disobeyed God. They ate from the tree when God said, don't eat from it. And because of that, sin entered into the world through that one man. And this sin passed to all human beings, just like Paul tells us in Romans. And thus, the original sin that has plagued humanity also plagues planet Earth, and the entire universe now, the Bible says, groans. The entire creation groans in anticipation and waiting for the sons of God to be revealed, for us to receive, to be made known as we truly are known by God, and also groans for Messiah to return and to establish his kingdom, right? The baby must be born. So planet Earth is groaning in labor. Eventually, it's going to be groaning in labor pains as the time approaches. So the prophetic language paints a picture of escalating global distress. And I believe this is deliberate by Yeshua, because they are signs of the end of the age, the culmination. They did not ask, the disciples did not ask Yeshua, what are going to be the signs of things that happen on planet Earth, generically speaking, until you return. I think they specifically were aware that there were going to be some imminent signs that point to almost an imminent return, or escalating signs that point to a culmination. In other words, kind of like something that is so close to as to indicate that your return or the end of the age is very, very close. There was a kind of a proximal aspect to their language, I believe. And the proof, I believe, is in the way that Yeshua answers their questions with all of these succeeding details. And as we're going to see a little bit further, he even gives these kind of chronological markers where he says, when you see this happen, and then, so that we realize that there's a succession and order to what's going on. It's not just utter chaos where everything's breaking loose at once. There is a sense of that we who are in the know, we who have eyes that are opened and are reading our Bibles and are trusting in God and are in tune with the Holy Spirit, and we're also watching the news so we can see the corresponding events that are happening, right? I mean, they are events that do take place on planet Earth and in our own cultures and in our politics and in our communities, et cetera, et cetera. So they're not things that happen on another planet. They happen on this planet. So we are able to observe them. Whether you're a believer or an unbeliever, you'll still be caught up in what's taking place in the end times. But the point I'm trying to highlight is that there are many of the events that will happen in a succeeding order. So if there is a sequence that we can kind of go, that happened, and we're watching the dominoes fall towards an expected event. So let's keep reading. As you can see, this part of my commentary goes fairly quickly since there's not much that's fleshed out in each one of these verses. Verse 8, but all these things are merely the beginning of birth pains. There we go. There's our analogy to the pregnancy. And this really, again, is destroyed by the historicist and the idealist perspective on the end times in the book of Revelation, et cetera, et cetera. The historicist kind of just draws everything out over a long period of time and says, these things have been happening for thousands of years, and just like Yeshua predicted, so we don't really have to smash everything into a last 7-year scenario. The idealist also likely kind of spiritualizes everything away that says, well, they're not even really actual physical events. They're more like just spiritual events that are taking place in the heavenlies and here on planet Earth, but they don't have to even correspond to physical disasters and things like that. They can be all kind of just symbolic. That's the kind of idealist perspective. In other words, let's just walk away with kind of the moral of the story and the lesson that Yeshua was trying to teach. We don't have to get stuck in the details and the minutia and the whether or not this is literal fulfillment. But I think those two lose sight of the idea of the beginnings of birth pains is really a shortened time frame that Yeshua was talking about, right? Because women give birth in a short amount of time period, and the birth pains kick in very, very close to when the baby's about to happen, about to come out. So that all corresponds. Of course, the preterist still has a leg to stand on here. He's still got a dog in this fight, because even preterism with the 70 AD event was just right around the corner from when Yeshua was having his chat with his disciples, right? Within a generation. So that's still good. We can still run with some of those details and say, yeah, they've got some details to add to the discussion. So let's keep going. So in my own commentary to this particular verse 8, I said, say, using the metaphor of birth pangs, Jesus conveys that the distressing events will intensify in frequency and intensity as the culmination of time approaches, right? Self-explanatory. Let's keep reading. Verse 9, then they will deliver you to tribulation. And he already talked about false Christ and things like that. And now he's going to start moving the disciples' thoughts towards this idea that you're going to suffer. You're going to suffer. It's not just going to be you sitting back watching the world go to hell in a handbasket. Rather, the situation is going to turn in such a way that they're going to come after you. Who's the they? Because he says, then they will deliver you. If you look by context, Yeshua doesn't actually tell them right away at first. He just starts talking about all these events, the beginnings of birth pangs, and wars and rumors of wars, and all the false Christ and things like that. But he now says they will deliver you to tribulation, which means there probably was a prior discussion. And I think the Luke 17 is a good example where he does give prior discussion where he's chatting with disciples. So by context, they understand who the they is. It's obviously the wicked rulers of the day, the unbelieving Jews of Yeshua's day who were always out to trap Jesus. And eventually they would go after the disciples of Jesus. They will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. Notice that in the 70 AD fulfillment of this event, the disciples were not hated by all nations. Were they? No, they weren't. They were only hated by, as it were, the nation of Israel. Primarily, the persecution in 70 came from the unbelieving leaders in Israel, in Jerusalem, and the surrounding areas. They hauled the disciples into their synagogues and persecuted them. And the days following, again, even up into the 130s, it was primarily an Israel-centric type of tribulation persecution with the destruction of Jerusalem, the plowing under, and the what we call the martyrdom of the saints and the Christians and things like that. Right? Fox's Book of Martyrs. Go back and read that. Read about the life and times of the wicked Emperor Nero, who also had an intense Christian hatred. So Jesus' words were fulfilled primarily in the first century, but it wouldn't be until they really started going around the world, like we have today, that we would be, as it were, disciples of Yeshua, hated by all nations. Unless that's hyperbole when he says all nations. Does he just mean the nations in the Middle East? Or does he mean like even all the surrounding nations, that the Gentiles would eventually receive this gospel message? I mean, but the point I'm trying to make is, how could Yeshua's words here in verse 9 really make sense until Paul had gone and kind of spearheaded this idea to be the disciple to the apostle to the Gentiles? But I'm not going to make that a deciding point. I'm just bringing it up for your observation.